And so this power fist and the tattoo cross and the Virgen de Guadalupe mural that is in the background, and this mural is actually, the background is actually from a mural in San Francisco's Mission District over on 24th and Cap Street. This invokes a lot of passionate feeling, I am certain you can see. What I would like to do now is discuss what the book cover can mean. First of all, let's look at the title itself. And the title is Barrio Bushido. And this can be loosely translated into street honor. Now, note that there is no codified Bushido in the barrio streets. However, this book displays that there is an essential substance to street honor. And the book portrays that the element of craziness is a big part of that. And it also has its downfalls and consequences to it as well. Also, we see here on the cover that you have the Virgen de Guadalupe, a beautiful image here. And in front of the Virgen herself, you have the brown power fist being raised. The power fist can represent anger. It can represent violence. It can represent a desire for something else as well. Okay? Andrea Young, the artist, the Korean-American artist who created this image, her interpretation of the image is that it is a symbol of redemption. It is a symbol of redemption. Now, I understand that some can find offense to the fist covering La Virgen, who is a very religious, iconic figure in Latino culture. However, a counter-argument to that is that it is not just the brown power fist that is covering La Virgen. In fact, what we have is a very powerful symbol at the forefront of it all. And that is the tattooed cross. The tattooed cross. So one way to interpret it is that it is not covering La Virgen. The fist is inspired by La Virgen, and also the tattooed cross is the point of it all. And I think at this point, we need to understand what this cross represents. This cross, to many who might see it tattooed on someone, they may immediately connect the cross to gang life. Now, I am not dismissing that there is not an element of gang lifestyle associated with the tattooed cross. But this cross has deeper roots than that. This cross, of course, is the symbol of Christianity. Christianity. So note what is being invoked here. We have religion, we have mythology, we have traditions, and also values that are associated with this tattooed cross. And it begs a discussion. This cross is the Pachuco cross. And you can find out much more about this online if you look up these words. The Pachuco cross became prominent here in the United States beginning in the 1930s, 1940s, with the original Pachucos, who then turned into Cholos, who then turned into your present-day Latino urban youth. They tattooed this cross on their hands. And they tattooed this cross on their hands because they wanted to form a new type of identity. An identity that was not purely Mexican or Latino in nature, and also with the brashness of being here in the United States. This Pachuco cross was an extremely popular tattoo for a homeboy or a homegirl to have on their hand from about 1940 to the early 1990s. Now, however, with tattoos in such vogue, this tattoo has lost some of its prominence. Not too many homeboys even tattoo this cross on their hands anymore. But it was a main staple at one point. And we should question, why is it that this tattooed cross was on the hands of so many? One, if we look at it from a religious or a mythological sense, we know that this symbol symbolizes the crucifixion of Jesus Christ. So we have the concept of sacrifice, pain, redemption, and what some believe is the ultimate proof of love. These were powerful, powerful ideas that shaped identity within the Latino culture. Now, another way to view this cross, especially since it was tattooed on the hand, is that this tattooed cross was a form of protection. To have this tattooed cross on oneself was a way to protect oneself from, if you look at it from a mythological perspective, from an evil. Or perhaps it's just ultra superstitious as well. How does it relate to traditions and values? In the past, before the emergence of the evangelical movement in the 1980s in the Latino culture, in Latin America, to be Latino was to be Catholic. And so Catholics were bonded by this symbol. They all celebrated baptism, confession, communion, wedding, and even the rites of death. And so this symbol joined cultural aspirations and traditions together. But how then, you may question, did it all of a sudden become a symbol related to gang membership? Well, in the United States, homeboys developed a philosophy about their lives, which was entitled La Vida Loca, which means the crazy life. The crazy life. Now, this lifestyle, and we're going to have to do a little bit of a comparison here between the La Vida Loca lifestyle and another word that some people believe is synonymous with it, but in actuality there is a difference. There are some shared traits, but there is a gigantic difference. La Vida Loca versus gangsterism. Okay? And here in the United States, we are enthralled with gangsterism, you know, with Scarface and Al Pacino and Goodfellas, etc. But we have to understand what joins gangsters together is not the same as what joins Vida Loca gente together. Gangsterism has two main purposes to it. One is power. Another is money. Gangsters want to gain power and gain wealth. Not so with La Vida Loca members. La Vida Loca means the crazy life. And originally, 1940s through about the 1980s, before the crack era began, homeboy cholos were not concerned too much about gaining prominent power or wealth. Homeboys wanted to live a very impromptu lifestyle. What does this mean? That means that they were involved with certain activities that led to unforeseen consequences. Super partying, drug use, violence, robberies, burglaries, gang violence, etc. So note that someone who was living La Vida Loca was someone who wanted a crazy life. And the purpose of these people, of these gang members, of these gente, was that there is life. There is life, and of course there's also death in craziness. In craziness. A big portion of this book, Barrio Bushido, deals with La Vida Loca and its philosophical and political themes. I think we're ready to start the text. I do want to pause for a moment here. And I know I cannot take questions here during this lecture, but I usually love to have a Socratic style discussion concerning this book or any other subject. As I said, I love to learn, I love to talk and dialogue with people, but because you can't do that right now with me face to face, I do want to guide you. If you have any questions about this, please visit todobododown.com and look up the essays. Also, you can email me or message me over to that site. Okay, we are going to begin textual analysis of the book, Barrio Bushido. We will begin on page 1, chapter 1, Losing Balance. I'll read the first paragraph, and then we will discuss. It was a soft, sunny, spring afternoon when God stopped loving them. Lobo, Toro, and Santo were relaxing, passing around a frozen 40-ounce bottle of Old English and shooting the shit on the cracked cement stairs of an old woman's iron-gated house in Montaña, their neighborhood, their barrio. The first sentence, we have a challenge to this traditional concept, or really this New Testament concept of God. The omniscient narrator of this first chapter tells us that God stops loving these three characters: Lobo, Toro, and Santo. This is a very harsh statement, and it also is a predictor of what will come. The reader, I'm certain, can already sense that these characters must have done something horrible for God to stop loving them. Let's talk about this God that is referenced here in this first sentence. This God does not seem like the stereotypical New Testament God, where we have a God who will always forgive, who will always love, no matter what. The kind of God we have here, this God has its limits. And this God perhaps is a vengeful God, perhaps is a karma-like God. Perhaps this God is more like an Old Testament God than a New Testament God, in that the Old Testament God was a God to fear. And we can reference that by looking at the first commandment of the Old Testament. That is, I am a jealous God. You will have no other gods before me. And so, if there is a reference to some other type of God, besides that New Testament God, who is this God? Where are these characters in the universe? Who are they? And if God stops loving, then who do they have? What do they have in the world? Let's look at the characters now. Lobo, Toro, and Santo. Lobo translates into the wolf. Toro is the bull. Santo is the saint. The wolf, you'll find out, very passionate, poetic, street hustler. The bull is a charger, someone who is extremely action-oriented. Santo is the saint, but not a saint for Christian ideals. He is a saint of the homeboys. And he believes his duty in life is to action like an ideal cholo would action. And so he is always thinking on those terms. Thinking always on those terms, of course, leads him to stress. And as many saints in the past have been deemed insane or martyred, Santo also suffers from these attributes. Okay, these characters have not seen each other in a year. They're reminiscing. they're drinking 40 ounces of malt liquor together. And Lobo begins a discussion in these first 2 pages about a past angel dust party they had when they were 16 years old. Now, the book is extremely gritty. It speaks from the character's perspective, using their language. Now, Lobo speaks in a very derogatory fashion in these first few pages, and throughout the book as well, about women. We have to take into account the time period, the setting of this first chapter, of the book itself, which is the late 1980s and the early 1990s. This is a transformational time period for homeboys and homegirls. In the late 1980s, early 1990s, the crack epidemic hit full force. The way homeboys saw women was changing. Women themselves were changing. And there was a gigantic confusion about what were the roles of men and what were the roles of women during that time period. I think it is very easy to dismiss the way these characters speak as if they are simply misogynistic or ultra violent or super macho. But in fact, late 1980s, early 1990s, women had lost the identity that these young men had expected for many years. Because of crack, women were stealing from their children. They were robbing their own grandmothers, prostituting themselves, and taking on forms that had been unseen during any other drug epidemic, whether that was the heroin epidemic or even alcoholism. One reaction to this in the urban culture was that gangster rap burgeoned. Groups such as NWA, artists such as Ice-T, Dr. Dre, Snoop Doggy Dogg, these types of artists began calling it the way they saw it. And they started referencing women as bitches and hoes. There is this sense that they are angry at women. There is also the reality that these artists are trying to protect themselves. Trying to protect themselves. Lobo, in particular, is a character who you will see throughout this novel tries to protect himself by using these derogatory terms. Of course, men love women. Of course, they understand their power. These words that are used in this book are ways to express their anger, their confusion, and also they are an attempt to protect themselves from women. Think of the logic here. A woman cannot have power over me, so I will reference her as if she is something that is subhuman. Therefore, a woman could never break my heart. But now let's think about this. Can that ever be true? We know that that's a farce. It's a sham. It's a fantasy. It's a fantasy that has consequences attached to it. By the end of the novel, you will see, especially with the character El Lobo, that this attitude has consequences.